there is a question that haunts the entire Harry Potter saga. One that readers debate for years, that divided the fandom, that felt until the very last pages of Book 7 genuinely unanswerable. Why did Dumbledore trust Snape? Because he didn't just tolerate him. He didn't just use him, but he trusted him completely and unconditionally, with the most important secret in the wizarding world. And the official answer is because Snape loves Lily. And that is true, but that's not the whole truth. Because I believe Dumbledore didn't just see Snape's love for Lily, but he saw himself. He saw his own wound and his own guilt, his own version of the same devastating mistake made in the youth and paid for in grief, carried for a lifetime. And today I'm going to take you in a journey to look at both of them together as the mirror they truly were. Welcome, witches, wizards, and magical souls. I solemnly swear that your magic is limitless. So let's start with what those two men have in common. What do Dumbledore and Snape have in common? Because on the surface, they could not be more different. Albus Dumbledore, beloved, celebrated, the greatest wizard of his age, warm, wise, seemingly all-knowing, the one that everyone turns to when the world falls apart. And on the other side, Severus Snape, cold, bitter, feared by students, despised by colleagues sometimes, the man that nobody trusts, the man who seems, for 6 books, to be exactly what he appears, a servant of darkness wearing a thin disguise. And yet, underneath the robes, underneath the reputation, underneath the carefully constructed persona each of them has built to survive, Dumbledore and Snape carry a mistake that they made in youth. A trust given to someone they shouldn't have trusted. And a death that they could have prevented. A love that they never stopped carrying. And a guilt so deep, so permanent, so defining, that it became the architecture of everything they did for the rest of their lives. And this is the mirror. Albus Dumbledore, whose greatest gift was always seeing people as they truly were, recognized the mirror in Snape immediately. So let's take them one by one. Severus Snape grew unloved. He had a difficult childhood, a cold home, a cruel father, and a mother who couldn't protect him. When he arrived in Hogwarts, he found something that felt like belonging. In the wrong place with the wrong people and for the wrong reasons, but he belonged somewhere at last. He was brilliant and bitter and hungry for power. And the Death Eater offered him all of these things. A community, a purpose, and a place where his particular gifts were valued. So of course he joined them. He needed to be part of something. He needed to belong to a community. And then he heard the fragment of a prophecy, the one prophecy that we took all along the series. And he carried this fragment faithfully, obediently to the Dark Lord. At that moment, he didn't know what Voldemort would do with it. Or perhaps he didn't let himself know. And so Voldemort chose the Potters, and Lily died. The one person Snape had loved, wholly, purely, since childhood. The one person who had ever seen something worth seeing in him. The one friendship that had survived everything for a long time, until he destroyed it himself with a word spoken in rage and shame. And then gone forever. Because of information he had willingly proven, she died. And Snape, who had chosen darkness for reasons that were not entirely dark, he suddenly understood the full weight of what he had done. He went to Dumbledore without a plan or an offer, but just with the pure devastation and the desperate need to tell someone who might understand him. And this was purely genuine for him. Like, I did this. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I did this. And he acknowledged his mistake. For real. Now, let's just leave Snape on the side for a bit, and let's focus on Dumbledore this time. Dumbledore's wound. So here is the thing about Albus Dumbledore that the wizarding world and most readers never fully understood. He was not always wise, he was not always good, and we saw this in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, specifically in detail in the book. There was a summer. He was 17, he was brilliant, he was restless and hungry for something bigger than Godric's Hollow. And that summer, a young man arrived in his village, Gellert Grindelwald. He was charismatic, visionary, talented, magnetic, and he was much more like Dumbledore than anyone he had ever met, as well in intelligence, in ambition, in the absolute certainty that they were destined for something extraordinary. And Dumbledore fell, not just in friendship, but he fell into love. And he fell into the kind of love that makes you blind, that makes the other person's vision feel like your own, that makes their dreams feel like the most important thing in the world. And he just fusioned into Grindelwald's vision. Grindelwald had a vision for the greater good and a world where wizards ruled openly, without having to hide from muggles, where power was held by those capable of wielding it, where the weak served the strong. And Dumbledore, who was brilliant, idealistic, he was a 17-year-old Dumbledore, he was seduced by it, specifically after what happened to his younger sister, who was attacked by muggles and who had to hide herself. He was seduced by this idea, by this vision, not entirely, not without reservation, but enough to plan, to dream alongside someone whose dreams were monstrous. And then there was that one confrontation. His brother, Aberforth, saw Grindelwald clearly. There was a fight that escalated, spells flying, and Ariana, Dumbledore's younger sister, who was fragile and damaged and desperately loved by Dumbledore, she was caught in the crossfire and she died within the fight. The saddest part is that Dumbledore, Albus Dumbledore, never knew actually whose spell killed her. And he carried that uncertainty, that unbearable, unanswerable question for the rest of his extraordinarily long life. Was it Grindelwald? Was it Aberforth? Was it him? He never knew who actually killed her. And perhaps that was the worst part, because he couldn't even be certain of his own innocence. So as he couldn't be, he assumed his guilt, and he carried it quietly, completely, without ever truly putting it down. His thoughts were, I trusted someone I shouldn't have. I was blinded by love. And someone I adored, someone who was very dear to me, paid the price for that. That is very familiar, right? When Snape arrived at Dumbledore's door, after having given the word to Voldemort about Lily, about the prophecy, he was broken, he was devastated, he was carrying the knowledge of what his actions had cost, and Dumbledore looked at him. He didn't see a Death Eater when he looked at Snape. He saw the mirror of a 17-year-old boy who had trusted the wrong person, who had been seduced by belonging, by power, by the vision of someone who had some bad intentions, by the intoxication of feeling chosen by something that seemed greater than himself. He saw a young man whose love for someone pure and good had not been enough to save her, because he had made his choice before he understood the cost. He saw himself in mirror. Not exactly identically, but the mirror between the two situations was enough so that he could recognize his own mistakes. Enough to know that what Snape was carrying was real, and that his grief, his remorse, was real. Enough to know that it was not just a performance, it was not just theater or pretending to be in grief, but the guilt was real. The love for Lily, and underneath everything, for the possibility of being someone different that he had become, was genuine. And Dumbledore made a choice, a huge choice, not to forgive Snape. That was not his to give. That was not his to give because Lily's forgiveness died with her. But he chose to believe him, to see the wound and to recognize it. He chose to say, with his trust, with his mission he gave him, with the absolute certainty he maintained until his death, I know what you're carrying. And I know that you can carry it in the service of something good. Because Dumbledore knew from his own experience that guilt this deep doesn't disappear, but it can be redirected into something different. It can become the engine of a different kind of life. So their decisions, Dumbledore's decisions to turn out of the greater good stuff with Grindelwald, and the decision of Snape to turn out of Voldemort stuff was exactly mirroring themselves. So you know this famous scene where Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" And Snape answers, "Always." That exchange between Dumbledore and Snape about Lily is one of the most quoted moments in the entire saga. But I'd like to offer a different perspective. Because Dumbledore asking, "After all this time?" with that mix of wonder and sadness in his voice, is not just a question about Snape. It is a question he asked himself. After all this time, do I still love Ariana? Do I still carry her? After all this time, do I still feel the weight of what I did that summer with Grindelwald? After all this time, am I still the boy who made that mistake? Always. The guilt never went away for them. Both men loved someone they lost because of their own choices. Both men organized their entire adult lives around that loss. Both men found a purpose, a mission larger than themselves, and poured their guilt and their love and their rage into it. Dumbledore decided to fight Grindelwald, and eventually, decades later, he faced the person his choice had helped create, and he stopped him. Snape protected Harry, the living embodiment of Lily, the child whose existence reminding him every single day of everything he had lost and everything he owned. We have here two men and the same wound, two different expressions of the same redemptive drive. Love, carried in grief, transformed into purpose. That is what they share, and that is why Dumbledore never doubted Snape. But I want to name something that doesn't get talked about enough. Underneath the grief, underneath the guilt, underneath the love, there is rage. In Snape, the rage of someone who has watched the consequences of his mistake play out in real time, who has had to look at Harry's face, or actually James Potter's face, the face of the person who resented the most, every single day for 7 years, who has had to pretend, who has had to be hated by the very person he was protecting, who could never even explain himself. That kind of rage doesn't just disappear. It goes underground. It comes out in the coldness, in the cruelty, the impossible standards he holds Harry to. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much and has no safe way to show it. And as for Dumbledore, the rage is quieter, but it's there. It's the rage of someone who knows exactly what it costs to be seduced by the wrong vision, who watched Grindelwald build an empire of darkness using ideas that they once dreamed about together, who had to live for decades with the knowledge that his blindness had contributed to that. Both men transformed their rage into discipline and into a mission, into the absolute refusal to let the mistake be the last word. They decided to turn it into redemption. And Dumbledore recognized Snape's rage because he knew his own rage. So here is what I found most profound about this relationship. Snape spent his entire adult life being misunderstood. Of course by Harry, who saw his father's bully and his mother's betrayal, but also by the Order, who never fully trusted him, and by the Death Eaters, who saw a spy they couldn't quite pin down. Also by the students, who saw a cold, unfair, vindicated teacher. Nobody saw the full picture because nobody could, except Dumbledore. And I truly believe that this is what created this link so strong between Dumbledore and Snape. Because Dumbledore saw all of it. The wound, and the love, and the guilt, and the rage, and the discipline, and the impossible, unglamorous, thankless courage of a man who had chosen to spend his life paying a debt that could never fully be repaid. So that's how. Dumbledore trusted Snape completely, publicly, and to the very end, but without ever saying the reason, because that would have meant exposure for him as well. And I think that in some quiet, unexpressed way, that trust of Dumbledore was the thing that made it possible for Snape to keep going. Not because external validation is the answer, but because being truly seen by one person who understood the full picture, the full complexity of who he is, this is one of the most sustaining experiences a human being can have. And Dumbledore gave Snape that. And it was all possible only because Dumbledore had his own wound to look through. So now let me bring this into your personal world, because this story isn't just about two fictional wizards carrying impossible guilt through an impossible war, but it's about something much more universal. First, there is the mirror of recognition. Who in your life do you trust most deeply? And why? Is it possible that part of that trust comes from a shared wound, a shared experience of failure, of loss, a choice you wish you could take back? The people who truly see us are often the people who carry something similar. Not identical, but very similar. Second, guilt as a compass. Both Dumbledore and Snape took their deepest guilt and transformed it into their life's purpose. So I'm going to ask you one question. What is the mistake you carry that you haven't yet transformed? The idea here is not to bypass the guilt or to pretend that it isn't real, but to ask, what is this guilt asking me to do? What is it pointing towards? Guilt in its healthiest form can be not a prison but a compass. And third, the grace of being seen. Is there someone in your life who sees you fully, wound and all, and trusts you anyway? And I'm asking is there, but I'm sure there is. So find it. Find this person. And who are you that person for someone else? Because that is what Dumbledore offered Snape. Not absolution or erasure of the past, but just, I see you. All of you, and I trust what you're capable of becoming. This kind of relationship is sacred. It can change everything for you. So now, Dumbledore trusted Snape because he looked at him and he saw his own reflection. Two men undone by misplaced trust. Two men who loved someone they lost. Two men who carried guilt so deep it became the foundation of everything they built afterwards. Two men who chose, imperfectly and painfully, at enormous personal cost, to let that guilt become something other than destruction. Well, in my opinion, this is the most sophisticated form of wisdom there is. The ability to look at someone's wound and to recognize it. I know what you're carrying because I carry it too. And to trust. Not despite that wound, but because of what you've seen people do with wounds like that. Because after all, we are all in some way carrying something we wish we could put down. So the question is, what are you building with it now? Leave me a comment below and tell me, what is the wound you're carrying and what might it be pointing you toward? I am Alice and I'm very looking forward to seeing you next week in the next video. Subscribe in order not to miss it. Until next time, and remember, the one chooses the wizard, but you chooses everything else. May your choices be your magic.